I notice something weird is happening that I didn't expect in the software, or one of the QA people comes by and says, we noticed this malfunction when we did A, B, and C, and almost every time I either am like, oh yeah, I know exactly why this happens, or I think I know what this happens, but I'm not sure, or I have no freaking idea why this is happening, and I've got to go in and I've got to find out. I've got to go through. It's almost, I have to do a tiny little mini study on our own software to figure out, to diagnose what is causing this observed behavior. You know, can I repeat the behavior? Can I narrow it down to a particular file? Can I narrow it down to a particular time period that the change was made? Can I narrow? Do I have an idea about what subsystem that might be causing this? I may have to do some tests where I say, well, what if we swap out this bit of data with this other bit of data? Does it exhibit the same behavior? I may have to say, all right, well, let's go back in our history, because we keep everything in revision control. Don't you dare be a software developer without revision control. It is your friend. And say, well, I'm pretty sure this is working 2 weeks ago, so let's pull out an old commit from our history there, run the same test, see if we get the same behavior, and try to narrow things down that way. So I mean, depending on what the type of the problem, there can be an hours or days long diagnostic activity that I have to go through to find out what in the world is the problem. And when I do find the problem, figure out, what do I want to do to patch this thing up. All right, so that's diagnostics. Other thing I do is inferring intent. Now this is very important in the software development process like this, because a lot of this code was written in a way that's not always well structured, it's not always well documented, and the question is always, when I'm looking at a bit of code, it's very often the question, why is this here? Why is this line of code doing this thing here in this particular way? And sometimes it's meaningful, and sometimes it's not. Because sometimes that bit of code is done in a particular way at a particular location, particular time, for a very specific reason that's not documented, because it has to do with something that happens way out in some other part of the code, and if you don't do it the certain way here, you're going to have a problem over there. So that's one thing. Sometimes it's done that way because it was a quick fix, a fast patch to get something out the door on time, and it was not meant to be a sustainable, repeatable solution. And that's what's called technical debt, where something was done in a way for expediency or for practicality to get something out the door, to get something done, and but it continually causes you problems for years and years and years to come. And it's best to try and figure out how to rearrange that or recode it or restructure it somehow, so that you don't keep running into problems. So inferring intent is about looking at say, okay, you do this, then you do this, and then you do this other thing. Does that mean anything? What's the intention behind it? Because again, it's not always well documented. People are not always stating why they did something in a certain way, and so the inference of intent has to do with a kind of a procedural idea, where you say, all right, if I see you doing this and this and this here, and this and this and this over here, can I draw an inference as to why it's meaningful to do it that way, if at all? So I kind of have to try and, because a lot of that code was written by someone who wasn't even there before. So I mean, it's not even always the case that there's anybody that I can ask about why this is here. So anyway, that's that. Other thing that I do, and this is the production part, producing procedural definitions, ideally new definitions or better definitions. Now, what I really mean by procedural definitions, I mean, you know what procedure is. We do procedure is we do step A, step B, step C. When this one thing happens, when this other thing happens, we do A, B, and C over here, and you can construct procedure. So it's Well, you know what? This actually has to do with languages. Okay, this has to do with language, because there was one fairly notable researcher who said that the act of programming is about constructing vocabulary, that is, definitions of things. Like when you introduce a term or a word, a definition, you have to define what that term means. And the better you are at creating complete, concise, and usable definitions, the better of a programmer you're going to be. You know what I mean? So the act of programming that I found to be an approach to coding that I found to be very successful is about building definitions. Like I say, all right, well, this is the thing that I want to do over here. Are there very clean, concise, well-defined terms, vocabulary that we can introduce to define one little thing at a time, and sort of brick by brick, you build up a vocabulary, a set of definitions to get to being able to say the thing that you want to say. And by say, I mean run in code, and actually have it do the thing that you want. So I'm constructing definitions of things every day. So I want to introduce a different terminology about this to help explain this a little bit deeper. So really what I'm doing here is, when I'm doing procedural definitions, is I'm defining achievable outcomes. What do I want this to do? The thing that I want it to do has to be possible based on not only the facilities that the machine has given to me, like what I know based on what information the machine is able to provide, and what I can do with it. And second thing, of course, this may be a great idea, but can I actually code this in the time and resources that I have? And this is kind of where I have to be very pragmatic about this, because there may be this great, grand, well-structured idea of, wouldn't it be great if we could do this, but pragmatically, the level of time and resource and manpower we have, and the technology we have available, says that's not achievable in the amount of time that I think it will. I've got to target something that is achievable within the amount of time and resource and information that I have. So I target that, and then I prescribe actions. And I say prescribe because, again, this is the procedural bit where I say, all right, if I want to get to this outcome up here, and by outcome I mean a set of an action that I'm able to perform, I have to prescribe how I get there. And this, again, is kind of like building up this tower of definitions to get to a definition that's actionable. So, personally, I kind of have this love-hate relationship with procedure, because I'm involved all the time in constructing procedure, and I really love the procedures I construct, but I absolutely hate it when somebody tries to impose procedure upon me. And this is something that I have to cope with, because I have to admit, okay, fine, some procedures provided by other people, all right, we'll go along with this because I believe we're going to get a good outcome. And sometimes the procedures that people try to impose are just awful. I'm just like, why are you having me do this? This doesn't make any. This is terrible. And that's how you sort of get bureaucratic nightmares, where you have somebody who thinks somewhere in the hierarchy who thinks that some procedure is a great idea in their own heads, but when you actually implement it and look at the ground level what is actually happening as a result of this procedure, you found out that the reality is considerably different than the ideal that you had in your head. So you got to try and be careful about this. So I am an undying fan of well-written procedure that does exactly what I expect it to do and achieves a good outcome with a minimal amount of work on my part. It's just kind of, I put the right puts in, the procedure grinds through, it always gives me the result that I expect, and it does so in a complete way. one of the worst things that can happen is you make a definition of a procedure that is not complete. That is, it doesn't cover all of the things that may be true when you begin the procedure. So that's how you end up with cracks in the system and bugs and edge cases, because eventually somebody will come along and they'll be in this situation that the procedure did not account for, and that's how you have people sort of things falling through the cracks, and then something weird and inexplicable or unfortunate happens, and okay, now you got to reboot your machine. Now, it's unfortunate when this happens to people in terms of bureaucratic procedure, because now you have a person that's been put in a bad situation because there was a crack in the rules that wasn't fixed. And yeah, so it's very important, I think, that when you're defining procedure, that task number one is to make sure it is complete. Every possible situation that may have a bearing on what you decide to do, you'd better figure out how you're going to account for it. Complete. Okay? So completeness and correctness go hand in hand. And then secondarily, what's the most expedient or efficient way to execute this procedure? But there's no point in making it expedient if it's not complete, because then things are going to fall through the cracks. You're going to get holes. You're going to get cracks. You're going to get security problems. And if you get to be big, like Amazon or Facebook or something, eventually somebody in the European Union is going to write some new legislation and decide to drag you into court over this.
Is that something your company has experienced?
Nope. We're a good company.
How big is the company, John? How many people are in the company?
There's about 60 people. So it's in its fifth year of operation. There's 60 people, and it's still in that kind of late stage startup kind of phase. So it's pretty much guaranteed to continue operating for at least the next 3 years. So job security, sort of. Security in the sense that. The skills I'm getting here are very transferable to other places. So even if the company can't make a go of it for some reason or another, I can always bring my skill set to someone else, and they'll be happy to have it, and that will be that. Yes.
Incidentally, on that count, has the company found that they can make a profit on a film yet? Like, is the market big enough to sell enough copies?
That is still a giant unknown.
Yeah, it's still.
That's still the end consumer ability to integrate these devices into their lives, and ability and willingness to pay for these devices and content is still very much a work in progress. What's happening now is the companies that. Some very big companies have entered these kinds of spaces, like Microsoft's in it. Facebook bought Oculus, so they're in it. There's a bunch of giant corporations that are behind. They're pushing for these kinds of technologies to be successful. They have sort of a chicken and egg situation where people aren't going to buy the devices unless they can get engaging content. But how are you going to deliver them engaging content unless you have devices? So what happens is that the people who these behemoth corporations who want to do these devices will actually pay other companies to produce content for the devices. So that's part of the business negotiations thing. And I'm still impressed by the leadership of this particular company, able to find these kinds of symbiotic relationships with other companies and people and studios to be able to build this content before consumers are willing to pay for it. There's been a couple of pilot projects to try and test the waters a bit to see how many people are willing to pay how much for some of these things, but that is a giant unknown. It's undecided. So it's kind of it's an interesting time to be in this industry because it's still in its formative stages. before we have proof or objective evidence that people will pay for this, there's a lot of people who are going and like, well, this looks promising. We're optimistic. We're bullish on this. We're gonna throw a bunch of money at it and see where it goes. And that's where the industry is at right now. And there's a lot of people pushing, collectively, kind of pushing toward getting this VR AR thing to happen. But no, at the moment, people are not willing to pay what it takes to produce these, but there's still a lot of optimism. So that's where we're at. All right, do I have any more slides here? Oh, example of a problem that I solved. Here we go. There's a bad definition of previous page. So here we'll have a little tiny, stupid little thing. And this is an example of, I have to solve 1,000 of these little problems. Like, it's just kind of, it's just one little example. So what happens is so you say you start it up, you navigate, you say, all right, I want to watch experience number 1, and so I click on that, so I go to another page that says, that gives me options to stream it or download it. So I click on download, I'm like, okay, and then I go click on yes to say I want to download, and I'm like, oh, I gotta go to something else, so I'm gonna cancel the download and press that. So there's in order to support the back button, which exists on every controller and headset, what should the back, it's a stupid little question, what should the back button do? Define it for me. What should a back button do?
Go back one step.
Go back one step. Okay, so we go through main menu, sub menu, download menu, cancel. Then we're back to the sub menu, and then we go back to the main menu. So we click back, and we end up retracing every single page we go through, sort of like a web browser. Problem is, I think hopefully you can see the problem here, is that I, as an end user, that's not what I really expect the back button to do in this scenario. Because what I expect it to do is I expect it to back me out one level. So there's this concept I have in my head of levels, where the main menu is one level, the sub menu is another level, the pop-up after that is another level, and when I press back, I want to go back down through the levels. And if I'm on the main menu and I press back, I mean, maybe there's an option to exit. Okay, that's what I expect the back button to do, but that's not what it was doing, because they just used all that was in there was a simple stack. So we had two problems. Circular navigation was when you go around and you click through a bunch of different things and you return to the same page that you were before, and so when you go back, you retrace circularly through all of these steps that you did, rather than just backing up one level. The other problem is Stack Overflow. Well, not really overflows, but I mean, unless you do something, this stack of pages that you're referring to gets very, very long, and it stops making sense as a solution. So this was actually, and of course this was causing bug reports, because we were getting stuff back from QA and says this back button doesn't make any sense, or there's an external agency that we have to send it to sometimes to validate whether or not we're a testing company, to validate what we're doing, and they say this back button behavior does not conform to our standards, and so so I had to think about this. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm gonna think about this for a day or two while I'm doing other things, and figure out what in the world am I gonna do about this. So the solution, I'll just give you just tiny problem, tiny solution. So what's our given? Our given here is a stack of page references. Here's the solution. Find the first reference in the stack that A, refers to the same page as the last reference on the stack. And that's it, just A. So if I'm on some page X, I go back to I start at the beginning of the stack, and I'm like, have I ever been to page X before? And if I have, I say, all right, that's our current page, and we blow away everything on the stack that's after that. And I'm like, can that really work? And I thought about it, I'm like, okay. Yeah, maybe that'll work. Oh, I should say something else here. This notion of levels was not coded into anything that we had at that point. So to go back and assign a level to every single page and every single project that we had is a lot of work, and it's very tedious, and we don't want to do that if we can avoid it. So that's part of the that's part of the utility of this. In many of the projects that we have, by following this procedure, we tend to preserve a very natural definition of go to the previous page with no extra definitional work on the programmer. The programmer doesn't have to go back and assign these levels to all of the pages and all of the projects that we have. Most of the time, it just works kind of the way we expect it. And that was very positive. I'm like, yeah, this is great. One of the best things about a solution like this is I can get rid of a bunch of code. Like, bad procedure that's buggy and full of holes, just gone. Just get rid of it. And that makes me happy. When I end up with a program that's does more of what I want with fewer code and less variables, it's just great. It's just spectacular. Anyway, so there's also a nice invariant invariant in this procedure. So you see what I'm going through. I go through in my thinking how examining whether this procedure really does, in every case that I care about, what I expect it to do. Invariant here is something that's always true about this procedure, no matter what. Like it is an absolute truth. If the last reference is unique in the stack, then the stack remains unchanged. Which means what? Which means it's safe to run this procedure anytime I want. And I don't have to be afraid of calling it too many times, or that it will affect something if I call it twice when I only needed to call it once. And so I can just sort of be liberal about it and say, well, anytime I go to a new page, I just run that procedure and just that's it. We're done with it. And because of the invariant, it just always works. Now, reasoning about invariance is a very big thing in computer science, because when you have an invariant that's well understood, it's something that's reliable, it's something that you can depend upon. Because when you successfully create a procedure that has a well understood invariant, then you know that thing is always going to be true, no matter what you do to it. This is again part of the definitional work of creating. If you can reason well about invariance, it's one of the things that would make you a good programmer. What else do I want to say about? What I want to say about that is that I have, since I did this, I have found examples where this is not exactly the behavior we want, because sometimes sometimes from the submenu you can go directly. And true in some of the projects that you can click on something to go directly to another submenu without returning to the main menu first. So there's a little bit, I had to augment this by having this facility for saying, all right, well, these submenus are all part of a group, and go in this. Anyway, I don't want to burden you too much with this. I just want to do that. So, all right, back up to higher level. Banes of my existence. These are some of the worst things in my experience about working here. Surprise deliveries. We're actively working on this, but it's always, we have not yet become free of this idea where it's like, all right, we know what we're going to do this week, and then someone says, all right, well, we want to get this video to this film festival next week, and it's got to have this special feature. Okay, great. Right. All right. So we have to kind of figure out how to adapt to it. And if the feature they want is not something that's easy to implement, or it's buggy, then that's a huge problem for us. Which relates to rushed features. There is unfortunately a lot of rushed features because there's a schedule to keep and not enough programmers to keep it, and things change. What we heard, what was wanted 2 weeks ago may not actually be what's wanted this week, in terms of so things change. We have to be flexible. We have to go with the flow, and sometimes we have to rush things to get out the door. And the unfortunate consequence of rushing things is we incur technical debt. And technical debt means that there's this thing that we did really quickly to get this one project out on time, and it looks great and it works great, but it causes us problems for every single other release we do in the future until we fix it. There's also the, organizational procedural problems. So at the organizational level, as a company scales from being a small startup with like 5 people to now being 60 and eventually greater, there's all kinds of problems that crop up just because of the growing pains of the scale. Like how to communicate to everybody what is needed in a coherent way. How to get the right information to the right people at the right time is just an issue. And this is, miscommunications happen, and most of the time, most people are pretty good about this, and they're like, okay, we screwed it up this time. We're gonna try and get this process right next time, and we roll along with it. So that can be kind of stressful, but there are some satisfactions. This is the good stuff. A real salary. It's about bloody time. Okay, it's just being able to do something that someone is willing to pay you real money for is good. Frequent positive feedback and support. Like I do something. I spend a month on it, and people get back to me. Oh, it looks great. The lead developer says, good job in the feature. The QA people are like, it works great. And some people that actually like download it and consumers say, we really like this thing. Most of the time, if I do my job right, the end consumer isn't going to notice. You only notice when I screw something up.
Just like the CIA.
Yeah, maybe just like the CIA. Yeah, because if all the pointy clicky things and the video stoppy things and all the languagey things all work the way people expect, they don't notice. They only notice when something happens that they didn't expect. You know what I mean? And so a lot of my work is rather invisible, but that's okay. People, I take it as appreciation when people download things and use them, and then they say nothing about it. It's great. But other people at work understand the difficulties of this, and so they're very supportive, and people there understand that everything we're doing is hard, and everything we're doing is chaos, and everything we're doing is on a deadline. It's just it's good being part of a team. Value contributions to highly visible projects, and so it's a different sort of thing. Again, getting back to being, when I was trying to do a thesis, it was a very solitary pursuit. As in, I was the expectation is kind of that I'm this one-man show. In that everything that's required to produce this project, I got to do on my own, and really primarily just on my own. If I say, well, I really hate literature surveys, can you do that for me? That really, that doesn't. It's hard to convince people that's something that more collaborative approach can actually work, or say I really hate. I really hate writing up this stuff. Can you write this thing for me? I'll provide you with data. Can you do some? Can we distribute the tasks somewhat? And I don't know. Maybe that's too new of a thing. Maybe people have trouble comprehending how they can get proper credit for that. Speaking of credit, just noticed an interesting mindset when we sent space explorers to be viewed in China, because one of the devices that we delivered on is some hardware that was manufactured in China. They were the company that actually manufactured a headset that was designed in North America, and they manufactured it, and it was like, oh great, we know how to make these, and so they just kind of made a competing piece of hardware and wrote their own software for it. There's not the same concept of individual intellectual property. Like a lot of people, they don't quite see what the issue with this is. The idea of rigorous intellectual attribution of intellectual property is something that, as best as I can tell, and you can tell me, you can inform me later if I'm wrong, is derived from the demands of the printing press. And the printing press, it's suddenly very hard to write something, but very easy to reproduce it. So now in order to protect our profit margins, we want to produce these laws about this thing where we relate these ideas to being intellectual property. So we cast it as a property thing, and now we've come up with this concept in the Western world, and it seems like it's not quite as strong of a concept when you say go to China. It's just not quite the same mindset. You know what I mean? And so anyway, I don't know where, I don't know, there's no conclusion to that thought. It's just kind of a thing. They have less trouble being collaborative over there, I'll say that, from what I've seen. Anyway, that's it. I think I have probably said a few more words than I strictly needed to, so questions, comments, talk to me. I'll be around for at least a couple more hours, so yeah, that's it.
So a couple things I learned. Number one, when I hit the back button and it doesn't do what I want, it's no longer a matter of saying, how stupid are these people? I can't promise that's going to happen. I think what I remember, my only programming experience in my life was a long time ago, and I did this elaborate set of nested formula in an Excel spreadsheet that helped a company do something. And two things really disappointed me from that. Number one, first of all, I realized I shouldn't do this for a living because I could do it and not stop and not eat and not sleep. And that's probably not what I should do. Secondly, all the fancy work I did, nobody gave a flying damn about. Just, if I punch in the number, does it do anything? And the third one is, you put in every possible feature, every possible thing could go wrong, and somebody says, how come it doesn't do this? I said, did anybody ask if that was a thing that should happen? And I decided at that point that studying Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings was a much better, career for me. So thank you, John. To learn some of the nitty-gritty of what goes on, I think is extremely valuable insight, because we just don't, many of us just don't know that. Some of it in different professions do, but I certainly don't know how these things actually work. But if you want to know what happens at the higher bureaucracies of the university, I didn't want to know that either. Yeah. All right, thank you very much, Jonathan. As promised, and thank you, Marisa, there are things here. Share wisely, and ask Jonathan questions, because